My name is Grace, and I'm a 35-year-old financial advisor. My journey took an unexpected turn the day Jonathan walked into my office. I still remember that moment vividly. He carried a hefty pile of documents, his brow furrowed in concern, and his eyes searching for reassurance. "Grace, right?" he asked, extending a hand. "I'm Jonathan. They tell me you're the expert at solving financial messes." I shook his hand with a smile. "That's what they say. Let's take a look and see what we're dealing with." Jonathan was tall, his short brown hair slightly tousled, and his warm, hazel eyes carried a hint of nervous energy. As we spread his paperwork across my desk, the professional tone soon gave way to casual conversation. We veered from discussing his financial situation to light-hearted debates about movies, favorite songs, and, surprisingly, the best pizza spots in town. His easygoing demeanor made the session feel less like work and more like catching up with an old friend. At one point, Jonathan leaned back in his chair and grinned. "I never thought sorting through this mess could be enjoyable." "Must be my magic touch," I joked. He chuckled, then surprised me by saying, "You know, I owe you a coffee for making this bearable. What do you say?" That coffee marked the beginning of something unexpected. Coffee turned into dinner, which evolved into weekends spent exploring new places, laughing until our cheeks hurt, and uncovering shared dreams. 7 months later, Jonathan proposed. It was impulsive, but when he knelt on one knee during a quiet picnic at the park, I didn't hesitate to say yes. It felt like a whirlwind romance, intense, fast, and seemingly perfect. Our wedding was modest but beautiful, surrounded by close friends and family. We exchanged vows in a sunlit garden. As Jonathan slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, as though I'd found my forever. His mother, Mary, was there too, though her stern demeanor initially unsettled me. She whispered warmly during the reception, "I can't wait to see the grandchildren you'll give us." At first, married life was everything I had dreamed of. Jonathan excelled in his career in real estate, while I thrived in my role at the firm. Evenings were spent sharing cozy dinners, watching movies, and taking long strolls through the neighborhood. We talked about our future, always envisioning it as a shared adventure. For a time, it felt as though nothing could disrupt our happiness. But the serenity didn't last. The topic of children began to surface more often, spurred primarily by Mary's persistent prodding. Initially, her comments were light-hearted. "Have you two thought about starting a family yet?" But they quickly turned into a steady drumbeat of expectations. Phone calls became weekly interrogations about pregnancy, and her visits always included unsolicited remarks about how children would complete the family. Jonathan tried to deflect her pressure with humor. "Mom, you'll be the first to know. Trust me," he'd joke, but her insistence only grew more intense. Soon, Mary began offering unsolicited advice on everything from baby names to nursery colors, even before we'd made any decisions about having children. At first, I tried to be understanding. I reminded myself that her eagerness stemmed from excitement and love, but as her interference became relentless, it started to weigh heavily on me. One evening, after another tense conversation with Mary, I finally voiced my frustrations to Jonathan. "Your mom needs to back off," I said, setting my fork down at the dinner table. "It's like she's a bigger part of our marriage than we are." Jonathan sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "She doesn't mean any harm, Grace. She's just excited." "It's more than that," I countered. "She's overstepping, and it's suffocating. This is our life, not hers." Jonathan tried to reassure me, but his response felt dismissive. "She's just being herself. Let's not make a big deal out of it." As time went on, Mary's involvement expanded beyond just the issue of children. She began offering unsolicited opinions on how we managed our finances, the food we ate, and even how we decorated our home. Her advice was never framed as suggestions but rather as instructions, as though she believed she had the ultimate say in how we lived our lives. I tried to set boundaries, but Jonathan often seemed torn between supporting me and appeasing his mother. Whenever I pushed back against her interference, he would urge me to just let it go, to keep the peace. However, the more I tried to accommodate, the more Mary pushed, until her presence felt like a constant shadow over our marriage. The tension began to seep into our relationship. What had once been a partnership filled with laughter and warmth now felt strained. With silent dinners and conversations that never delved deeper than the surface, I found myself questioning how something so beautiful could unravel so quickly. It became increasingly clear that while Jonathan had captured my heart, His inability, or unwillingness, to stand up to Mary was beginning to shatter it. I knew I had to address the issue before it consumed us entirely. I filed for divorce. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only choice I had. Jonathan and his mother tried everything they could to make it difficult, believing they were entitled to a share of everything I had. But I had a strong case. Everything I owned, my savings, my property, was mine long before Jonathan came into my life. Their attempts to claim what wasn't theirs failed miserably. As for alimony, I didn't ask for a penny. I wanted nothing tying me to Jonathan, no reason for him or his mother to interfere in my life again. I was determined to begin anew, free from their toxicity. I found a modest apartment, not too flashy, but comfortable enough to be a fresh start. Packing up my things from the house was bittersweet. Every photo and piece of furniture carried a memory, but I was ready to leave them behind. The day I moved out, Jonathan was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he couldn't face me, or perhaps he simply didn't care. Either way, it didn't matter. I left the keys on the counter and closed that chapter. The first few nights in my new apartment were the hardest. The silence was deafening, and the reality of my situation often brought me to tears. But I found solace in the tiny life growing within me. Every night, I spoke softly to my unborn child, filling the small space with whispers of hope and love. Gradually, what had felt like a refuge began to feel like a true home. My daily routines brought comfort, and my bond with my unborn child grew stronger each day. One afternoon, while sorting through old boxes, I found a photograph of Jonathan and me from happier times. A brief pang of sadness washed over me, but it quickly gave way to relief. That chapter was behind me. Just then, my phone rang. It was Jonathan. "Grace, I've received the divorce papers," he said, his voice flat. "I'm glad they reached you. Please take care of the formalities," I replied, keeping my tone steady. There was a pause before he added, "I won't bother you about the baby. You won't hear from me again." His cold farewell brought a sense of closure. Hanging up, I realized that in my solitude, I had discovered a strength I didn't know I had. I was ready to face the future, not as Jonathan's ex-wife, but as a strong, independent woman and a devoted mother. One quiet evening, as I sat reading a magazine, my 5-year-old son, Arthur, played with his toys on the floor. Our peaceful moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. I opened it to find a woman whose sorrowful eyes seemed strangely familiar. "Hi, Grace, it's been a long time," she said hesitantly. It took a moment, but then I recognized her, Pamela, a friend from my life with Jonathan. "Pamela," I said. "Yes, it has been. What brings you here?" She shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Arthur, who was now peeking curiously from behind my legs. "I thought you should know about Jonathan," she said, her voice soft. Just hearing his name after all these years sent a chill through me. "What about him?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. Pamela sighed. "He's not doing well, Grace. After you left, things went downhill. He became an alcoholic, remarried a few years ago, and had another child. The boy was born with disabilities, and Jonathan couldn't handle it. He left them, divorced his wife, and now he's refusing to pay child support. He's in legal trouble." The news struck me, but not the way Pamela might have expected. I felt sorrow, not for Jonathan, but for his child and the woman he had abandoned. "That's terrible," I said softly. Pamela nodded. "I thought you should know, considering your past with him." I appreciated her concern but knew I had to maintain my boundaries. "Thank you for telling me, Pamela, but that part of my life is over. Jonathan made his choices, and they no longer involve me or my son." Pamela looked at Arthur, then back at me. "I understand, Grace," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "I appreciate it, Pamela, but my focus is on Arthur and our life now. What Jonathan does or doesn't do isn't my concern anymore." Pamela nodded, understanding. "I hope you and Arthur are happy, Grace. You both deserve it." "Thank you," I replied, smiling at Arthur, who had returned to his toys. After Pamela left, I closed the door behind her and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The past had a way of creeping back, but I was determined to keep it at bay, ensuring that our future remained bright and unaffected by the shadows of days gone by. The park was alive with the laughter of children and the distant barks of dogs at play. I watched Arthur, my heart swelling with pride as he dashed around, his laughter mixing with the joy in the air. Suddenly, a familiar voice cut through the moment. sending a chill down my spine. "Grace, is that you?" I turned, my heart sinking. It was Mary, my former mother-in-law, walking toward us with a gaze fixed on Arthur. "Mary," I greeted her coolly, "what are you doing here?" She ignored the coldness in my voice, her eyes never leaving Arthur. "He's grown so much. He's your son, right?" "Yes, this is Arthur," I replied, subtly stepping between her and my son. Her eyes gleamed with an unsettling eagerness. "I was hoping to see him, after all, he's my grandson." A wave of irritation washed over me. "And why would you want to see him?" "Well, you know my other grandson," she began, her voice trailing off as her expression darkened. "He's not well, he's sick, it's just not the same. I want to be part of a healthy grandchild's life." Her words were a slap, the contempt in her voice for her sick grandson shocking. "Mary," I said, my voice firm, "you have no right to be part of Arthur's life, not after everything that happened." "But Grace, that was all Jonathan's doing," she protested weakly. I shook my head, dismissing her. "You supported him, you turned against me when I was carrying your grandchild, and now you speak with such disdain about your other grandson just because he's sick. That's unforgivable." Mary's face hardened. "You can't keep me away from my grandson." "I can, and I will," I declared firmly. "Arthur doesn't need someone in his life who values people based on their health. He will not be part of your twisted view of family." She looked as if she wanted to argue further, but I cut her off. "This conversation is over. Stay away from us, Mary, your presence is neither wanted nor welcome." Taking Arthur's hand, I walked away, leaving Mary standing alone, her face a mixture of anger and disbelief. As we walked, Arthur looked up at me with innocent eyes, full of questions. "Mommy, who was that lady?" "That was someone we used to know, sweetheart," I said gently, "but she's not part of our lives anymore." Later, sitting on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm hues, I felt a profound sense of peace. Arthur's laughter echoed as he played, reminding me that life had settled into a calm rhythm. The storms of the past were distant memories. "Mom, look what I made." Arthur's voice broke through my thoughts as he rushed over, holding up a drawing, a picture of the two of us smiling beneath a bright sun. "It's beautiful, Arthur," I said, pulling him into a hug. "You're quite the artist." He beamed with pride. "I want to put it on the fridge." "Let's do that," I smiled, following him inside. As I reflected on how far we'd come, I realized how much we had both grown. The pain and anger of the past had faded, making room for healing and new beginnings. Later that evening, after Arthur had drifted off to sleep, I sat with a cup of tea, reflecting on the day. The phone rang, and I hesitated before answering. "Hello." "Hey, Grace, it's Kayla. I just wanted to check in. How are you and Arthur doing?" "We're doing well, Kayla. Arthur's growing up so fast," I replied, smiling at the sound of her voice. "I heard about your run-in with Mary. Are you okay?" she asked, her voice warm with concern. I sighed. "Yes, it was unexpected, but I'm okay. It's just another reminder of the past." "I know it's tough, but you've come so far, Grace. You're strong, and you've built a wonderful life for you and Arthur," she said, her words wrapping around me like a warm blanket. "Thanks, Kayla, it means a lot." We talked for a while longer, about small, comforting things. The connection with my sister reminded me of the support system I had, even when the days felt daunting. After we hung up, I walked into the living room, where Arthur's drawing proudly adorned the fridge. Looking at it, I realized how far we'd come. The pain and anger of the past had faded, making space for healing and hope. I tiptoed into Arthur's room, watching him sleep peacefully. I kissed his forehead gently. "Good night, my little artist," I whispered. Back on the porch, I gazed up at the stars, feeling a quiet strength. The echoes of the past were fading, their grip loosening. In their place was hope, resilience, and the unconditional love between a mother and her son. This new chapter wasn't just about moving on, it was about thriving.